I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 123 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognise you by name before speaking. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. And before we start, I think Madame Debienne got a statement she'd like to make. Anyway.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to draw to your attention a few days ago when we received a report on the mental health of fish harvesters in Quebec. We heard about the tragic death by suicide of a crab harvester from Chandler. I'd like to offer my condolences to the family and to those close to him and to all harvesters across the country.
Madam Debienne, I'm sure we all send our prayers towards that very family at this time. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted on Monday, September 16, 2024, the committee is commencing its study of the mandate and current priorities of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Welcome to our witnesses on the first panel. Of course, we have the Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, the Honourable Diane Laboutier, accompanied by Mario Pelletier, the Commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard, and from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Mr. Kevin Brousseau, Associate Deputy Minister. Thank you for taking time to appear today, Minister. You have 5 minutes or less for an opening statement. You have the floor.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Chair. It's a real pleasure for me to join you here on the traditional lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. Thank you for having invited me to take the floor today to talk about my mandate and highlight certain progress made by my department in the areas of interest to the committee. All the work that I'm about to talk about has to do with my commitment to promote reconciliation, to support coastal communities, to fight against the loss of biodiversity, and to fight against attenuate the effects of climate change. I'd like to start by mentioning two devastating incidents that took place these 2 past months. In the beginning of August, a plane transporting officials from the department crashed during a scientific mission in Newfoundland and Labrador. An employee lost their life in the accident and 2 other members were injured. This was a major loss for the department family and for the entire scientific community. Just last month, we learned that a member of the brew of the Vincent Massey was lost at sea off the shore of Newfoundland and Labrador. As you can well imagine, this is a huge loss to Canada and to the Canadian Coast Guard. We are a close family. These are tragedies that really are heart-wrenching. We think of the families, to the beloved of those injured or lost, and to all those people in the department who know these people and who worked with them. As a Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard, I'm responsible to support sustainability, stability, and the prosperity of the fisheries to the benefit of all fish harvesters, including Indigenous peoples, and to ensure the security of the marine areas in Canadian waters. These are questions I take very seriously. Over the past year, I took a number of decisions based on scientists and other stakeholders, which led to the opening of new commercial fishery of bourgeot, of sea cucumbers, of urchins, and the opening of northern cod and redfish. I also authorized the fish bait of personal use Atlantic mackerel bait fishery. I also announced a new pilot program that will study other species and the use of support for lobster harvesters and a potential for further development in future. Recently, I also allowed for seal hunting for personal use, which will be made available to hunters in New Brunswick and PEI. This hunt is focused on the 2 types of seal whose population are in a healthy area within a framework of the precautionary approach, we will also limit the access to license holders for 2024 in order to carry out this pilot activity in new areas. Each seal hunter for personal use who receives a permit can hunt up to 6 of these species of seal. I encourage our partners internationally and nationally to open their harbors to Canadian products from our sustainable seal hunt. As concerns reconciliation, I commit myself to work in partnership with Indigenous communities to implement the right to fish to ensure subsistence. The government argues that we support the sector either by funding repair of essential for small craft harbors, and by providing innovative technologies, by working with partners to reduce the threat by fish gear and bycatch, and to seek to reduce the loss of future gear by developing the first ever conservation strategy that seeks to promote the policy of wild salmon, Atlantic wild salmon stock, and to allow for a new review of the Fisheries Act to strengthen protection for owners and to protect the fish industry for coming generations. My department also uses in close cooperation with provinces and territories and Indigenous partners, fishery organizations, and the fisheries themselves to restore the Pacific salmon stocks. Not long ago, an agreement was signed between the BC on fish resources. This 2-year funding agreement provides a framework for an efficient framework of cooperation and of governance of planning of fish resources of the 5 nations. This is another important part of my mandate is to work with provinces and territories and Indigenous communities, the industry, environmentalists, and other stakeholders to protect 30% of the country's oceans between now and 2030. Between 2015, less than 2% of Canada's oceans were protected. Now the number is up to 15%, which is about the size of British Columbia. As for the Canadian Coast Guard, the government continues to invest in our fleet and land activities and technologies infrastructure of the organization. I'm proud to announce to the committee today that in the month of August, the Canadian Coast Guard and our shipbuilding plan opened an initiative for new oceanographic vessels to collect essential ocean data that will help us deal with the most urgent oceanographic problems such as climate change. The data and the samples collected by these vessels will also support our national and international commitments to ensure sustainable management of our oceans. In addition to this work, the Canadian Coast Guard signed an historic agreement with the Norwegian Coast Guard seeking to buttress maritime safety and security. As for our commitments in the field of reconciliation, by cooperating with Indigenous groups who are essential partners in these areas, and when it comes to protect the environment, by training them and funding them, and publishing the Canadian Coast Guard strategy. We have a 10-year strategy that will enable the Coast Guard, in cooperation with First Nation, Inuit, and Métis, to continue to ensure safety, security, science, and sovereignty on the waters, as well as environmental protection in an operational context that is changing constantly in the North. Chair, last year was a productive year with the opening of new commercial fisheries, the gathering of new scientific data to support coming fisheries, and to achieve the main objectives of the Canadian Coast Guard. Each day, I'm grateful to the staff of the Canadian Coast Guard and the department and all our partners from one ocean to the next for the hard work that we achieve to give real life to the government's commitments. I would now be delighted to answer any questions you may have.
Minister, a little bit over. Hopefully we can catch up along the way. We'll now go to Mr. Small for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister and her associates for appearing here today. My question to the Minister. Minister, would you agree that the aquaculture industry is a valuable component of coastal economies? Yes or no?
Bien, effectivement, vous avez raison.
Yes, you're quite right. Aquaculture is a precious activity. It's a question of food security. Yes.
So you're aware, Minister, you're aware of the importance of the oyster industry, both the commercial fishery side and the aquaculture side, to the PEI economy and actually their culture and the very being of the island, Prince Edward Island.
Bien, effectivement, l'industrie des...
Yes, indeed. The aquaculture, oyster industry makes an important economic contribution and is going through a difficult, really devastating period this year.
To hear that you're there for the oyster industry, but it sounds of what you're saying here. But you know, it was announced in July 24th of this summer that the MSX parasite had shown up in PEI in 3 locations. Then, 3 or 4 weeks later, you announced some funding. Was it like $500,000 for this year to support that industry?
Non, c'est près, je pense, près d'1
No,
million.
I think it's more like $1 million. $1 million.
So I've had aquaculture industry stakeholders from MP Casey's, MP Morrissey, MP McDonald, MP McCauley's ridings all reach out to me. They're extremely concerned that the speed and the commitment from your department to addressing the MSX issue in the oyster industry of PEI is lacking what they actually need. Do you understand that this industry could be completely and more than likely will be completely wiped out within the next 2 years in Prince Edward Island?
Effectivement, d'ailleurs, j'étais à l'île du Prince.
Yes, in fact, I was in PEI this summer. I met industry representatives with my colleague Bob Morrissey, and that's hence the $1 million announcement. We're working in close cooperation with the provincial government and within the industry in the areas of research to see how we can best help, because the consequence.
This parasite wipes out the oyster industry wherever it shows up completely. It wiped it out about 20 years ago in Bredor Lake, and it wiped it out up and down the eastern seaboard. It's wiped it out everywhere. Are you aware
Oui,
that
je suis au
it'll take
courant.
at least 3 generations of oysters, which is how many years? How many years in a generation of oysters?
Oui, je suis au
Yes,
courant.
I'm aware of the consequences and the fact that we are not able to find a solution, and I was aware of what happened in Bredor, where there were no more oysters, and there are still none today.
To know that you're aware, but the fine folks of Prince Edward Island, they're quite concerned, and they're expressing to me that you haven't done enough. Now, there are some people who you've done quite a bit for, as compared to $500,000 this year, $500,000 next year, for an industry that, including its spin-offs, contributes close to $100 million to the economy of Prince Edward Island. Are you familiar with a group called the Atlantic Healthy Oceans Initiative?
Yeah. No.
No?
No. No.
No.
By an acronym. Ahoy? Now, not Chips Ahoy, you know, not the cookies, you know. Not familiar?
J'espère qu'on ne parlera pas de biscuits ici
I
aujourd'hui.
hope we're talking about cookies here today.
Five employees, You just dished out 1.8 million to this Ahoy Group, Atlantic Healthy Oceans Initiative. 1.8 million to them. 500,000 to the entire oyster industry of Prince Edward Island. That's not showing to me that you really care. Can you explain to me how that's showing that you care? 1.5 million, staff 5 people, 500,000, entire industry of Prince Edward Island, the oyster industry. I can't see the logic.
I
can understand that for the Conservatives, research and development and the work of scientists is not important. It's never been important to you. But let me say that for the industry of the oyster industry, research and development is indeed important.
Sorry, Mr. Small, your time is up. And I would remind members, if they're asking a question, to allow the question to be answered, please. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less.
So, Madam Minister, we're going to go to the West Coast, if you don't mind. And I want to go back to, 12 years ago, to October of 2012 and the Cohen Commission report on Fraser River salmon. And I wanted to check to see if, in fact, the following was on your mandate, or at least on your radar. Recommendation 3 in Justice Cohen's report said, the Government of Canada should remove from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans mandate the promotion of salmon farming as an industry and farm salmon as a product. This, since 2012, has been recognized as putting the DFO in a very difficult, conflicted situation, because there have been certainly suggestions that they have abandoned the precautionary principle in the past out of the interest of the promotion of the salmon farming industry. And I'm wondering if there has at least been any discussion, if not progress, on removing the salmon farming industry from the overview or the scrutiny of the DFO and putting it someplace where it doesn't put the DFO into a perceived conflict.
Okay. Non, ce que je veux, vraiment ce que je veux.
No, what I would say to my colleague with anything relating to salmon farming, it's a topic that is important. And as I said at the start, there's also a question of food security. And we saw this in the latest numbers that came out since 2022. All wild species on the planet are in grave danger. And from 2020 on, in the aquaculture sector, we saw how much consumption has increased. And so work has to be done, and we have to strike the right balance between protection of wild salmon, but also, as I was saying, the whole matter of food security, anything that affects aquaculture. But this work that has to be done, and we at the DFO are trying to strike the right balance.
Well, on behalf of the British Columbia side, we hope that there's a reconsideration of the Cohen report recommendations. I think a lot of work has been done, a lot of positive work, but there are still gaps that I think need to be addressed, even if it's to say, no, we're not going to do it. At least we'll know where we stand. I read through the draft salmon aquaculture transition plan for British Columbia, and it would seem that a fair bit of work was done to cover the ground, to talk to a lot of the stakeholders. But what I really honestly didn't see in the transition plan was consultation with the aquaculture industry itself. I know that, we've had a lot of discussions with them, and they've resisted everything that we've come forward with in terms of the, the problems and the difficulties that we've seen over time. But I'm wondering, if, notwithstanding what may or may not be in the transition plan, is there ongoing dialogue with the industry out there about their future in British Columbia?
Oui, effectivement.
Yes, indeed. What was submitted was a transition plan. It's not a transition, it wasn't a finalized transition plan. We have to continue the work hand in hand with the aquaculture industry because it's work that has to be done through cooperation, not just with the industry, but also with the provincial government, with Indigenous communities and the federal government. So let me just say that this work continues, that's ongoing. And as I was saying, we do have to carry out this transition, all the while protecting Canadians' food security.
I think this leads to basically another question. First and foremost, the aquaculture industry finally woke up to the fact that you and your immediate predecessor were really serious about reforming that whole industry, and the work that's been done since, the new regimes being brought in are quite brave and very definitive, and I believe the West Coast thanks you very much for that. But along the way, we, in this committee particularly, took a very, very close look at the science being conducted by the DFO. And I think the gentlest way of putting it, that there was some gaps in our confidence that the science being done and presented as evidence for decision making fell short, particularly when it did come to aquaculture. And I'm wondering, if you can give us the latest background on, moves to add a little bit more credibility to science at the DFO. I'm concerned, for instance, that some of the studies done were funded by the aquaculture industry, which, is enlightened self-interest, of course, can worm its way in there. So what can you tell us about the state of science at the DFO on the West Coast? Are you convinced that they're doing their job?
Écoutez, ce que je peux dire à mon collègue...
What I can tell my colleague is that science evolves. And I think the world over, with respect to aquaculture, the sector, both the sector and in government, we want to use the best practices possible to protect the wild species, and so work that has to be done through cooperation at the DFO, but also with universities, with environmental organizations, and with all those who are concerned, who are involved in the aquaculture sector, but also who are concerned to protect wild species and the connection between the two sectors. It's a work in progress, as they say. This work has to continue.
Commissioner, Madame Debian, for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à nos témoins d'être...
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Good day to you, Minister. Very quickly, it's not a question, but I just wanted to draw to your attention that a letter was sent to you in May, a few months ago. It was also sent to DEC Canada, to Transport Canada, to Industry and Innovation from EcoMaris, a vessel that carries out research for the Canadian Coast Guard in particular, but all for the Indigenous communities. There was a victim of an error from Transport Canada that had to do with the accreditation of the vessel before and after purchase, and no one's listened to this person. And we have to look at this problem closely, because a lot of young people who left school, who are school leavers, and were able to go through a wonderful apprenticeship programs on this vessel. I wanted to draw that to your attention first and foremost. Next, recently we heard, Minister, that tens of millions of dollars are being invested in offshore vessels. And as if by accident, there's the opening of the redfish fishery, the cod fishery, and the question was asked, have you invested money? You say yes, several millions. But were these people aware of the fact that offshores who get a big share of the quota, were you aware that this was going to happen, and given that you invested so much? Well, when it comes to the opening up of the redfish fishery, there was money from the Fisheries Fund, which would be set aside to support vessels and companies to adapt to the reopening of the fishery, whatever, offshore, inshore, it gives people work in our processing facilities and people here. I think things might be going well where you're from, but not so. It's not so much the case in Quebec. The money that's going to support these vessels, can we hope that the dozens of shrimpers who are on the dock, other types of harvesters, pelagers, who want to fish and who want to be able to live off fishing at some point? The quotas that were attributed to Quebec were part of Quebec's historic quota, so I'm very proud to say that Quebec's quotas were upheld, and we even added to them. For harvesters as well, there have been requests that were made to the Fisheries Fund, and soon be approving the funding for the Fisheries Fund. And you're quite right to mention that just last week, we had discussions with people from the redfish sector. It's just a beginning of an opening. We have to adapt after 30 years. It's been 2 years of adapting to this opening. So an exchange is underway to allow for greater flexibility. The important thing is also to say, yes, there's a redfish fishery, but we have to protect when it comes to bycatch. The latest news is that in Newfoundland, there were some vessels that went out and they came back with 43 tons of redfish. So the work is being done, but we can well understand that after a closing of 30 years, and I just made the announcement a year or so ago, everyone's adapting, including when it comes to the processing end of things. Yes, I hope there are shrimpers that hear you and the pelagic fishers as well, because they've just headed off to sea it's been at sea just for a year. We often hear from harvesters that they're never consulted, that they can't forecast, they can't plan, they never know what's happening. Whereas the offshore operations seem to know what's going on, and so much so that they invest millions upstream. Is there a sincere will to work hand in hand with fishers, with harvesters, to consider their interests more? This isn't me saying this. This is what I'm always told by them. They're not sufficiently consulted. Well, what I can tell you, because I meet harvesters often. They're from where I'm from. I meet them everywhere. They're from Canada. I meet their organizations very frequently, in person, and fishers. I have no problem to go anywhere to meet them. No problem, whatever. I feel I'm safe wherever I go. No, it's not a matter of safety or security. I know that these fishers work in cooperation, but there's also some adaptation. Have you seen the shrimpers, dry dock shrimpers? Yes, I do meet them. That's close to where I'm from. Well, what does it mean to you? What about redfish? Was the redfish fishery opened up too late? Let me just say that I took the decision very quickly as soon as I became minister. And so we're going to continue to work and adapt for many years for the members, but also from the region, also for the shrimpers. They really had to fight to defend their quota. And so this is the work I did, was to significantly reduce the shrimp quotas. Is it going to be easy in coming years? Well, there's going to have to be a lot of adaptation because the Gulf is warming up. There are fishers who won't be around any longer to adapt.
Thank you, Chair. Bienvenue, Ministre. I'm happy that you're here today. There's lots of questions for us to be able to ask you. The first one, this wasn't going to be on my list today, but now I have to ask. Of course, my colleague, MP Hardy, was asking about the transition of open net fish farms. And a couple of things that stuck out to me. The first thing is that there seem to be I felt like you were saying that there was a difference between food security and the protection of wild salmon, that they were two separate things that needed to be balanced, was what I was hearing. But I want to point out how important it is for us to recognize that the protection of wild salmon is protecting food security. The two aren't polar opposites that need to be balanced. In fact, you can look at both of them. And the transition away from open net fish farms is part of protecting wild Pacific salmon and food security. And so I appreciate the questions that were asked, but I do want to highlight one of the questions was around industry not being consulted enough. And we know for a fact that industry between July 2022 and September 2023 were consulted 52 times by the previous minister, and I believe some of that might have included you. I can't remember the exact timeline. And so just to clarify, the question that was asked around industry not being consulted enough, we know that Maui, Grieg, Cermak have been consulted to a much larger degree than any other stakeholder. And I'm wondering if you would be able to comment on the amount of consultation that has happened with industry through the process of developing a transition plan, which in my opinion is not happening in a timely enough manner.
Ben, écoutez, ce que je peux vous dire, c'est au cours
What I
de la-
can tell you is that over the past year, I went 3 times to BC. I spent almost 21 days in British Columbia, 3 times to meet people from the sector, as much from aquaculture as from the different indigenous communities, to work with people in the sector, to meet people from the processing sector, to meet the fishery, the salmon aquaculture industry. Yes, quite a lot of work has been done, and it's still being done. It's not just me. I also have my team. I have someone who's specifically dedicated to the whole matter of BC fisheries.
Can you confirm that significantly through this process?
Oui, il y a eu des consultations.
Thank
Yes, very much so.
you. Minister, on the southern coast of Vancouver Island, we have lighthouses, 2 in particular, light stations, Pachina Point and Carmana Point. It is my understanding that this week there are staff members being removed from these stations, and we know the important role that these light stations play along our coast, both for navigation, for the safety of mariners. They help out in endless ways with search and rescue, emergency response operations. And as you, I hope, are fully aware, the entire NDP caucus sent, including the leader of the NDP, sent you a letter with concerns that are being brought forward by West Coasters around the removal of these lighthouse keepers from these lighthouses. Minister, there was also a report that came out in 2011 that was called, oh, I'm forgetting the name of it here. But the report was very, very clear in its recommendations in 2011. And the report stated on there, it was the Seeing the Light is what it was called, and which is quite appropriate. I'm wondering if you have looked at this letter and saw the recommendation in here that very clearly articulates that consultations are required, that consultations happen with all those impacted around the lighthouses, and has that been taken?
Ben, écoutez, je peux vous dire que oui, au niveau des phares, l'automne.
Let me just say, when it comes to lighthouses, both on the west and east coast, I visited a lighthouse, and I understand the importance of lighthouses, and also the important role they play with respect to navigation. And perhaps I can let my colleague answer. Yes, thank you.
Service always, and always say the safety of it starts with the safety of our people, so that we can deliver the service and making sure the mariners are safe. So we have a situation at those 2 light stations where the ground is unstable. We have a report, the geotechnical
Thank you,
report.
Mr. Pelletier. If I could, I so appreciate the information. I want to hear your answers. I'm wondering if we could change the order, perhaps, that I can ask you more clarification once the second hour comes and our minister has gone. I just wanted to ask if the minister, and perhaps you could provide some additional feedback, of course, through the chair, but I'm wondering about if the consultation has happened with the lightkeepers themselves, as is stated clearly in the Senate report that came out. Are they being consulted? And all those impacted, are they aware of this plan? It sounds like they're being pulled out and there has been no consultation with all those impacted. So I'm wanting to get some clarification from the minister. Thank you so much.
Mais comme je le disais, au niveau des technicalités,
As I was saying, when it comes to the technical details, Mr. Pelletier is better placed to answer your questions. These are technical issues. You're asking me personally if I've consulted lighthouse keepers? No, not personally, but if you want a more comprehensive answer that is in line with the concerns and people's safety, I think Mr. Pelletier is better placed to answer those questions. If you want a real answer,
in writing, because we've gone a little bit over time, we'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for appearing, and appreciate the remarks you delivered last night at the Salmon Forever reception, and I hope that those the support that you expressed in those remarks will result in meaningful actions for Pacific salmon. Minister, the Fraser River is a major artery for Pacific salmon, which is why it's so important to combat illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing on the Fraser system. During your tenure now as leading DFO, what has been the trend of DFO's enforcement activities on the Fraser River? Have DFO's conservation protection enforcement activities on the Fraser increased, decreased, or stayed the same?
ce que je peux vous mentionner, c'est que les
illegal IUU fishing is completely unacceptable for our government, and we committed ourselves to preserve fish stocks and to enforce the law on the fisheries. And so there are targeted measures, targeted law, depending on each sector, but the work is being done. Is it perfect? Probably not, because we have a huge territory, but the work is being done.
Activities increased, decreased, or stayed the same during your tenure?
Mr. Chair, as the minister mentioned, it certainly is the enforcement operations on the Fraser River on the West Coast are certainly a priority. I think that, you know, to be able to categorize it as going up or down based on the time that the minister has been as the minister, it might be easier for us to be able to provide you statistics on hours patrolled, et cetera. We can do that through you, Chair.
Ask for that in writing by year to the committee. Thank you. Minister, in your last appearance in March, I believe it was your last appearance, when you were here in March, you told the committee that, quote, zebra mussels are found everywhere in Canada. That statement was clearly false and caused an acute concern amongst conservationists and organizations that are fighting against aquatic invasive species in Canada. Western Canadians are wondering how they can trust you to protect fish habitat when you believe that they are already infested with the species that we must fight. Minister, will you finally acknowledge that preventing the spread of zebra and quagga mussels in Western Canada is essential and ensure Western Canada receives its fair share of federal resources to prevent aquatic invasive species?
j'ai pas eu le dernier bout au niveau de la traduction.
I didn't understand the very last part in the interpretation. Could you just repeat the very end of your question?
Acknowledge that preventing the spread of zebra and quagga mussels in Western Canada is essential and ensure Western Canada receives its fair share of federal resources to prevent aquatic invasive species.
Oui, ben écoutez, je peux vous dire que c'est une priorité au niveau.
Yeah, I can say that it's a priority for government to work to fight against all invasive species, and it's work that DFO takes very seriously, whether with respect to the zebra mussel or quagga mussel or the green crab. Of all species, for all these species, it's a very significant share of our work because it has such an impact on our area.
Whether how seriously your department takes this, I was recently provided a letter that had been sent to you from the Okanagan Basin Water Board, dated October 18th, 2023. Your department responded on your behalf on October 17th of 2024. 1 year to respond to a letter that simply had 2 requests. I would suggest to you that your ministry, you and your ministry, have failed to take the risk of aquatic invasive species as a serious threat to Western Canada. I want to move on to the next piece. Commercial catch monitoring. Last year, the Commissioner on the Environment and Sustainable Development found that DFO had failed to, quote, collect the dependable and timely information about fish catch, and it needs to substantially manage commercial marine fisheries and protect Canada's fish stocks from overfishing, end quote. Why has DFO failed so badly to monitor commercial harvests?
Écoutez, je peux vous dire que peut-être pour votre.
In response to your first question, I'd like to come back to it when it comes to invasive species. We invest millions of dollars across Canada to fight invasive species and their impact on the sector. With respect to catch monitoring, we have a 5-year plan of $30.9 million of investment from 2023 on, and so $5.1 million for the implementation of catch monitoring. So the work is being done, but as I was saying, you will understand that we have a huge territory, but...
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Madam Minister, to FOPO. Madam Minister, since it was brought up earlier, MSX, as you are well aware, exists in every oyster-growing region in North America. It's not new, and it's being dealt with. And I want to thank you for taking the time to come in and meet with the industry and myself extensively when it first became available, when it first was detected. The key priority at that time was to ensure continued access to the market. And government, through its agencies, stepped up and addressed that through CFIA to ensure the market, because at that time, our sister provinces of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia were wanting to stop exports going through until we determined. Why I'm saying that, Madam Minister, is because in PEI, the oyster industry is jointly managed between the PEI government and the federal government. In 1987, DFO signed an agreement with the government of PEI to co-manage the oyster fishery because it's inland waters and bays. You were there when it first came about, but on this October the 8th, PEI Conservative Minister stated that the oyster industry is thriving. That's 2 weeks ago, and required no assistance from the government to go. Our position is much different. You said very clear you'd be there for the industry when the industry decides what supports it needs. This is an industry that is not always on the same page. And to this date, we're still waiting to see exactly what the plan will be formulated to ensure that this industry grows. But it does not wipe it out. We're having a fall fishery this fall. It's going not bad. But there has to be steps put in place for the future. But unlike the provincial minister, you were there for the industry and stood with it, and we're committed to go there. So I want to go to another issue. I was pleased when you announced, was this morning or yesterday, that you'd be authorizing personal use sealing licenses for PEI. Could Could you give us a bit of a number on what you hope this harvest may do? Because we've heard so much in this committee about efficient harvesting of this resource, which seems to be growing in abundance. Would you care to expand on just exactly what it means?
Oui. Ben, écoutez, au niveau des
When it comes to license, what we really want to work on is to develop the economy around sealing, to allow for access to protein that are seals, and to use the whole product, to work hand in hand with Indigenous communities, both nationally as well as internationally, so that we can fully take advantage when it comes to tourism, restaurants, to allow for an access to a product which is appealing, which has an interest for the whole population. So this is a sector of the economy that we have to develop with Indigenous communities, with the provincial government as well. I was very happy. We made the announcement yesterday, but in my office, we've already received calls from people who would like to have access to these sealing licenses. It was an announcement for PEI, but also for New Brunswick. And will also be opening it up for Nova Scotia to work on rules and to also be able to access these sealing licenses. This is an activity that can be a growth sector, as was done at one time with lobsters. It's really the best possible outcome. We've given lobsters. We used to hand out lobsters as if it was going out of style.
I believe it is to have a personal use license. Is this the first time? The first time the department has issued such a license?
À l'île du Prince-Édouard, oui. Oui.
For PEI, yes.
And yes, I've received a lot of positive comments as well. I believe my time is up, Madam Minister. So thank you for that, and looking forward to meeting with you again when the oyster industry and the government of PEI decide what best steps forward we have to take.
Mr. Morrissey, we'll now go to Madam Debienne for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to continue along the same lines of the concerns of fishers, of shrimpers. We heard from them in Radio-Canada reports. They've really put out a cry to be heard, to have greater forecasting capacity, and mackerel fishers as well, who spent hundreds of millions of dollars just 3 days before the opening, to be told afterwards that that the fishery would not be opening, whereas these offshore fishers spend millions for fisheries that are opened up. What are the prospects for the future? The independent scientists often consult harvesters on the ground and do factor in their observations, who have the best view of what's going on. Your ships do carry out readings as well, but they're out there on the water every day. They know what's going on, but they're just not heard, and that really is distressing for them, not to be heard. And it's especially when it's the government that's going to decide the future course of their lives. Can you tell us that things will change? Things have already changed. I've been on the ground with them for the past year. I meet them regularly. But then why do we hear them on Radio-Canada saying the exact opposite and saying how bad things are? Well, I meet them regularly. But you're right to say that fishers have a level of expertise, whether traditional fishers or people from Indigenous communities and scientists. As I was saying, the way I work with the sector is by putting everyone's expertise together to work together on fisheries, today's fisheries, to ensure we have sustainable fisheries for current and future generations. And I think fishers are the most likely to want to protect this resource because they live off of it. Can we expect specific funding for fishers who have endured huge losses because of the closing, whereas they see these offshore vessels casting their huge nets? They just sucked up the resource. Something terribly wrong is going on. You're mixing up things. You can't talk about inshore fisheries, but inshore fisheries is essential in Quebec, and the offshore fishers operations are taking their fish. But no, these are two different things. But one has an impact on the other, and one is. And I know that it's where you're from. I can take my car and go and visit you easily.
For 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. Do I have the floor? Thank you, Minister. Minister, I want to bring it back just based on the fact that you were saying that you wanted to leave some of the technical stuff. So I just want to ask very simply, are you aware of the lighthouse keepers that are being removed at Pachina Point and Carmana Point on Vancouver Island starting this week? Is this something you're aware of?
Oui, écoutez, on sait qu'au niveau des phares, puis c'est...
Yes, when it comes to lighthouses, we know it's increasingly difficult to find lighthouse keepers. But when it comes to new technologies, there are new technologies which to help with navigation.
Sir, the question is, are you aware of these two lighthouses where the lighthouse keepers are being removed? Because if you're not aware, then I can't ask the follow-up questions. You are familiar.
Oui, je suis au courant.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I am aware.
Of the impacts on coastal communities, on mariners, on West Coasters of these lighthouse keepers being removed from these lighthouses this week. Could you tell me a little bit about those impacts that you're aware of and why it's continuing to be allowed to happen with those impacts?
Oui. Mais je peux vous dire que pour moi, il y a une question de sécurité au niveau
There's a question of the lighthouse keepers' safety. And also when you look at new technologies, when it comes to navigation, things are changing with new technologies that are safer as well. Yes, I am aware, but the whole sector is changing.
Talked about technology that the new automated navigation systems will allow people's screams to be heard when they are, we've heard of multiple incidences of people dying along the coast, of people crying for help and having their cries heard by people who are in these lighthouses. Do you think that system that has an automated system will be able to do the job of people who have been doing this work for generations in these lighthouses?
Oui, mais écoutez, même si des choses ont été faites pendant des générations...
Well, even if things were done for generations, the world changes, and as do technologies. These new technologies do allow for navigation assistance, and what's important for me is to look after the safety of those who are on the water.
The same level of security that lighthouse keepers have for generations. I would like to
We'll
get
now
that
go
in
to
writing,
Mr.
please.
Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for coming. I think you'll be surprised to learn that I'm going to ask you about your recent letter around Elvers. In March, when you appeared before the committee as you had shut the season down, you said, I want to assure you that the fishery will be open in 2025. There will be regulations. The statement that you were making at the time was that you couldn't have the fishery open unless you had regulations in place. Will regulations be in place before the opening of the 2025 season?
La pêche à la civelle va réouvrir en 2025.
The Elver fishery will be reopened in 2025 with clearer rules.
Sorry, I didn't pick up the translation.
The Elver fishery will be reopened in 2025 with clearer rules.
So on your recent letter you sent to the fishery, you're basically telling the 12 license holders, 8 of whom are the commercial ones, that for 30 years have actually created and built this industry, that you're going to take you're going to expropriate 75% of their quota and give it to others without compensation. You're ignoring the willing buyer, willing seller policy that your department has yet again. If you're going to take 75% of their quota and give it to others, not for conservation, but to give it for others, will you abide by the willing seller, willing buyer policy?
Écoutez, ce que je peux vous dire, c'est que pour moi,
What I can say is that when it comes to Elvers, there should be a broadening to allow for economic prosperity, which in particular in rural regions, and I hope this goal that we share, that you believe in the ability to develop the economy and to enable people to have access to permits, to licenses.
What's going to happen, because those who work for the commercial Elver license holders now make somewhere between $60,000 to $90,000 a year. Under your scenario, they will be lucky to make $50,000. So you will actually be impoverishing them over what they're doing. I don't know if you know those numbers. So why would you say, Minister, let's say you own a Tim Hortons donut franchise, and you come along and say, well, I think it's unfair that you make a lot of money from that franchise, so I will take 3/4 of that business, and I'm going to give it to your employees, and too bad that you've invested all this in the business. So sad, I'm going to make it more equitable in some strange socialist world.
écoutez, moi, ce que je peux vous dire,
What
c'est
I can say is that people who currently have access to the Elver fishery did not have to pay for their licenses, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars. So to enable access to young people, to enable access to new generations, what you're saying is not true.
Adult eel licenses at 0.84 kilogram per eel trap. That's how it was created 30 years ago. It was created by people who already had paid for a license and had an established business. You should learn about the history of it. And the fact is that they invest and have created businesses that have sustained hundreds and hundreds of people. So why would you think it would be better for people who work to earn less money than they do now?
écoutez, comme je vous dis, là, moi, c'est clair.
As I was saying, I went to Portland in Maine. I see how things work. They were talking about a fishery for which a kilo of Elvers on the market is about $5,000 per kilo for people. No, the work will be done with people from the sector, and I can assure you that young people and the new generations will have access to the licenses to ensure the upkeeping of families.
When you couldn't do it in 8.
Il n'y avait aucune règle qui se faisait dans le passé.
There were no rules in the past. That's why we went to Maine to see what their rules were to provide broaden access.
How much TAC or a quota will you give the eel license holders, the 30, that you are saying you can convert to Elver? What will the quota be for them, and why would you take it from existing quota when that measure should produce a larger quota under conservation rules?
Minister, if you could provide an answer in writing, it would be best, because Mr. Perkins has gone a little bit over. We'll now go to Mr. Waller for the last 5 minutes for this round.
Thank you, Chair, et je veux remercier le ministre d'être ici aujourd'hui.
I'd like to thank the Minister for being with us today, for answering our questions.
Some of the questions that some of my colleagues were making about the aquaculture transition. In the announcement on June 19th of this year, the transition plan, draft transition plan, was announced, and there's a few items on that I'd like to dig into a little bit. The first one was that effective July 1st of this year, there was a commitment made that new licenses would be done for a maximum of 5 years, but they would also come with stricter conditions to ensure improved management of sea lice, robust reporting requirements, and additional monitoring of marine mammal interactions. So, Minister, I was hoping you might be able to explain to this committee here how these new interim licenses, the conditions differ from what was there before.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The licenses are definitely have more strict requirements. Will have more stricter requirements, and you identified a few with respect to reporting requirements, et cetera. We're seeing as this is a 5-year transition period, if you will, until closed net pens are actually required in 5 years from the time of the announcement. Of course, DFO will continue to monitor, continue to enforce those conditions, and will continue to engage with communities and do what we have. But in terms of precision around additional license requirements, Mr. Chair, we can provide additional details about what those conditions are in writing through you, Chair.
Thank you. That would be very much appreciated. And kind of following up on that, I think, unfortunately, how the media has reported this was that, this was not a change that would come into effect in any way until 2029. And I saw some media reporting on that and some very viral video from William Shatner to that effect as well. But Minister, I was hoping you might be able to explain how this will be a phased approach, as part of the announcement was that restocking decisions would have to be done with this final band date of 2029 in mind.
Okay, écoutez, comme on l'a mentionné, là, c'était une
As we were saying, this is a draft transition plan, and so we knew full well that the work had to continue, but in closer cooperation with our partners, including the provincial government, if we want to move from sea transition plan to transition from sea to land. You can see what's happening in BC with the government. Everything will be in place to work in close cooperation to go into greater detail. But we've taken the time, but the discussions are continuing. It's important for the industry at least to know that whether it should invest or not in the transition plan to move on land. In the discussions I've had with aquaculture companies, when their banks are very hesitant to support them, and when it comes to aquaculture, there's a real possibility that it'll just close down. The idea is to have aquaculture done elsewhere. There's a discussion both in the west and the east to shift to the east, and on the Atlantic side, aquaculture is a provincial matter, and some provinces have said that we're ready to develop agriculture in the east. So these discussions continue, and we'll continue to work, and we'll keep you informed about what's coming. But there's the whole matter of the transition with some closures, but with the innovation department, there's someone handling this, because we know that there are jobs involved, and we know that in the fishery sector, when there are fishery closures, there are impacts that are quite widespread in the communities, because you're really dealing with it's really the bread and butter of people involved directly or indirectly in the fisheries, and so it becomes a very controversial subject. We have to work in close cooperation with all the different actors.
For an hour, so we'll suspend for a moment to allow the Minister to leave, and I believe Mr. Burns is going to join at the table for the last hour of testimony, questioning. Neil O'Day? I wasn't sure if it was Niall or Neil. All right, so we'll start off the first round of questioning for 6 minutes or less. Mr. Small.
Mr. Chair, no opening remarks.
There's no remarks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question to Mr. Byrne, and I've been thinking about this for a while. The minister just disregarded the advice of her own scientists and in reopening the commercial northern cod quota. I'm wondering if there's a chance that she might reopen a commercial mackerel fishery, given that she's just, went against her department on northern cod. Are we going to see a mackerel fishery in 2025?
So, Mr. Chair, no decision's been taken on the 2025 mackerel fishery. That would be a decision that would be taken in the winter, early spring kind of period.
So I understand that your department's been conducting some science on mackerel over the past summer. Do you have any of those results tabulated yet? Do you have any direction? Are there any improvements in the mackerel stock based on the science that you've conducted over the last couple of years?
I don't believe that there is new peer-reviewed science available yet for mackerel. I don't have the exact schedule for the CSAS process for mackerel, but we could provide the committee with the science schedule for that.
So I'll switch to Mr. Burns. I'll switch to Unit 1 redfish, where the decision was recently made to let the 4RST vessels fish in shallower water than was originally laid out. Are they going to be able to use ground trawl beyond October 31st?
Part of the minister's decision to adjust some of the bycatch measures included a change to the date when midwater trawl will become the mandatory gear type, which has been pushed out to January 1st. So, yes.
So will you consider making that measure a permanent measure so that the redfish harvesters could use their ground trawl all year in 4RST?
So following this year's fishery, we'll have a redfish advisory committee. We'll consult with the fishing industry who've participated in the fishery, and decisions for next year's fishery will be taken in due course.
Okay. So we'll revisit the last time when you were here. You've made a statement that the inshore cod grounds were different than the offshore cod grounds for northern cod. How did you come up with that idea?
I'm not sure I recall the specific statement. Certainly, fish migrate from one area of the fishing zones to another. So during the summer months, the fish tend to be more inshore, and later in the year, through the winter months, they tend to be more offshore.
No, you'd said that these grounds are different grounds. That the inshore fishers don't fish on offshore grounds, but right now, and this year, the inshore harvesters have fished out to the edge of the continental shelf. They couldn't go any further. So, given that fact, those grounds are basically the same grounds. I was a little bit troubled. I was a little bit troubled to hear that. So, what kind of knowledge does your department have on where inshore harvesters fish? Do you actually analyze the locations, the logbook data that's submitted by the inshore fishery? Because if you did, you would have known that it was the same. They were fishing the same grounds.
To repeat what my colleague from DFO Science said at the last meeting, the logbook data was indeed used and analyzed in the peer review process that generated the science that was the underpinning to the minister's decision.
Right on. So I have to go back to and ask you again, because I've had quite a few people from back home that have brought this up to me. The fact that you said the minister had reopened the commercial northern cod fishery, because she wanted year-round employment from it. And basically, the inshore portion of that quota was taken in 7 weeks. The offshore portion will be taken in a couple of weeks. And the number of people that have actually taken part in that harvesting and it'll take part in the offshore harvesting are relatively small number of people. So how does that equate to year-round employment?
In the minister's decision and in her statement related to that when she spoke of year-round employment, it certainly is true that with a quota that it is right now, that does get fished at a relatively quick pace. But over time, with sustainable management, the hope would be that biomass increases, increasing the quotas available to all fleets, which would further increase the employment and economic benefits to Newfoundland and Labrador.
So where did you guys, Mr. Burns, where did you guys find that data from 1954 that you brought into the stock assessment? You find that on microfiche somewhere, or did you do an archaeological dig to dig it up? Microfilm. Microfiche.
That would have to be a question answered by DFO Science. I'm not a DFO scientist, so I don't have the specifics on that, but we can commit to get back to you with.
Because as you know, it's one of my
data.
favorite things to do is to ask you about those.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Small. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes or less. What? It's not all fun here.
I'll give you my time.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Premièrement,
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by thanking Mr. Pelletier and to follow that up with a question. Thanks for the excellent work you did last year when you reopened the fishery. There was less ice over the winters, but your teams were ready. The contracts were signed. The harvesters were very happy with the cooperation they got from your team at the Coast Guard. So thank you very much. And this year, I want to make sure that we're ready again for the opening of the fishery, where I think the ice will be a bit thicker this year. Are we ready? Have the contracts been signed? Has everything been planned to ensure a smooth opening this year? Yes, very much so. The same mechanisms from last year are in place this year as well. Thank you. Mr. Burns, I think there was a meeting last week or maybe a few weeks ago with the industry about what the minister was saying following what happened last year in my region where they wanted to close the fishery for 2 weeks because a whale had entered the zone, the Vin-Brun area. Did this discussion take place last week? That meeting was with the technical committee. We'll have advisory committee with the whole industry in soon. As you know, Mr. Beans, last year with what happened, it had a really damaging effect on the region, not just for fishers, but for the whole entire community. And Mr. Burns, I think you saw my comments at the time. I was very harsh toward you and department staff and the minister as well. You know, Mr. Burns, it's been 7 years that there are measures in place for whales. And when I see that we're not even able to deal with small changes that will not affect our markets to ensure that we don't go through such situations, requiring the entire fishery zone for 2 weeks. I was invited to a meeting. It's a $3 billion industry, and it was even told that this wouldn't have such a big impact on the industry, just a small closing over a short period. If that's the way you're thinking, if that's the way you see things, I really wonder if you can get full trust from the industry and from communities. So this is my question for you. Are you going to deploy more flexible measures to deal with whales, North Atlantic right whales? There are scientists who are at the meeting, and they said that the measures and the tools we could put in place more flexible tools to not create the stress for the industry, not penalize our fishers, the industry, the communities, are you going to implement more flexible measures? And my last, just to wrap up, the Canada government uses 3 different maps when it comes to water depth to determine where the whale is located. That's just unacceptable. As an elected official, it's unacceptable for the industry and for communities. We thought these were real dummies. And will there be changes? Will there be changes when it comes to protecting these whales? Yes, when it comes to the protocols, when it comes to 10 fathom and 20 fathom water depths, these measures were put in place in response to industry requests to reduce the impact on the lobster fishery. It's also quite necessary to have check deep water lines to make sure they're correct, to make sure that will work. We're very much aware of the impact on industry last spring. And all this will be taken into consideration by the minister when she makes decisions around protection measures for 2025. Very well. Shrimpers now. Shrimpers came to meet the minister in March and meet ministry staff to talk about a support plan, but there's been no follow-up since that March meeting. Are you aware of the requests from shrimpers when it comes to assistance plans, whether you agree or not? Have you had a meeting with them since that March meeting? The minister is, of course, fully aware of this, and we're working with the industry. Our staff in the Quebec region are working closely with the industry. The minister, yes, of course, the minister also provided redfish allocations, and there have been. I don't have much time left. There were some announcements made about small harbor crafts recently. All the different port authorities I speak with say that it's an administrative burden to have all the different permits, environmental permits, construction permits, tenders. Isn't there some way in 2024 to simplify these things? There are fishers who die because there's no digging, who are just ruined financially. Everyone says that it's not the government, but the administration is so cumbersome that these things just don't move forward quickly. What can be done? These are not licenses issued by the small craft harbors. We talk about this at the department, of course, but it's not something that's. It's not under the control of the Small Craft Harbors program, but we do work with port authorities, with the communities to move things along as quickly as possible to get these projects going.
To Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à nos
Thank you,
témoins.
Chair. Thanks to our witnesses as well. I have a question for Mr. Pelletier. Have you been able to deal with the processing times of complaints for harassment and intimidation in the Quebec region? And have you restored your ability to communicate in French with French speakers at the Coast Guard? First question: yes, the file backlog of complaints has diminished. And both at the department, at the Coast Guard, we've made real efforts. I don't have the specific numbers, but it's significant. And when it comes to the French language, I think all staff in Quebec do have access to services in French. I haven't been informed of. Wasn't there a hiring of a superintendent who couldn't speak French There's an superintendent in Quebec who's involved with the rollout in Quebec, and there's training that comes when someone is appointed to such positions. The directives give us that latitude. But if someone is directly connected to Quebec, they can indeed provide services in the French language. Well, let's just hope that things will improve over time. We heard from a witness last week, someone who's very interesting, an economist, in fact, who had been deputy ministry in Newfoundland and Labrador. He said they had to depoliticize resource protection, and when it comes to fish resource protection, that we needed co-management between those on the ground and a certain number of stakeholders who were not political. What do you think of such an approach? We heard that the minister had made a decision against the directives coming from her department. So what would be best to protect the resource into future?
Thank
you for the question. All decisions that are made in close cooperation and in consultation with the different stakeholders and partners, including the provinces who participate in the different advisory processes. This is the best way for us to keep the minister informed of the outlook of all these different partners. And this goes toward making the best possible decisions with scientific data, socioeconomic data, and other data as well. And that goes to the minister, yes. It's a bit of an embarrassing or difficult question. I'll try to ask it in a different way. Do scientists, what you hear from environmentalists, what you hear from different environmental stakeholders, can they not take precedence over a final decision that actually undermines what scientists say? That is a decision of a political nature. Wouldn't a mediation be a better way to approach things in some contexts? It's not what's planned in the Fisheries Act, which actually gives the minister the right to make the final decision. We're going to be changing the laws, the act soon, are we not? Norway's and Finland's success was discussed by an expert who'd done a lot of studies on North Atlantic right whales. And they said that knowledge comes from the ground, that in Norway and Finland, they're able to succeed much more than Canada because they don't live in a federal system. This kind of overlap between the feds, the provinces, does it not create, as Mr. Cormier was saying earlier, a kind of bottleneck? Would it not be better to decentralize fish management? I would say that our system is actually quite effective. We make dozens of fishery decisions every year based on science, and we have a consultation process. That's part of it, of course, and this is followed up with the different advisory tables who contribute to the decision making. Of course, fisheries are in constant evolution and on a very large scale, and it's useful to have a national or federal government involved to manage things on such a large scale. I just have 30 seconds left. In a context where there's a basic crisis of the collapse of certain biomasses, and I've been here for a few years now. How do we explain that fishers are crying out to you that you have to open up the redfish as well as the shrimp for using it for a longer time? How can you not react more quickly in such circumstances and deal with what we're facing, the collapse of the shrimp biomass? the decision that was taken was the outcome that the size of redfish stocks were sufficient to get a high enough price on markets to make the fishery a viable one. And without that, there wouldn't be any fishers to harvest this resource. They wouldn't see any value in doing so.
6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome. My first question is to you, Mr. Burns. In the 2023 report by the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development that, as we know, this committee studied, we heard that overall Fisheries and Oceans Canada remains unable to collect the dependable and timely catch data that it needs to sustainably manage commercial marine fisheries and protect Canada's fish stocks. We know that in this report, it notes an internal DFO briefing note from 2020 stressing the need to improve data collection and indicating that e-logs would be mandatory by 2023. We know that that has not happened. We know that harvesters are still continuing to use paper logs. And I was hoping you could clarify for us today if that commitment remains to mandate the introduction of national e-logs for the 2025 season across Canada.
Thanks, and to answer those questions, I can note that in the beginning last year in 2023, the government made an investment of $30.9 million over 5 years to implement the fisheries monitoring policy. And so that work is now underway across all fisheries, looking at the various data needs and approaches in order to collect that necessary data to support the management, the enforcement, the science basis of these fisheries. In terms of e-logs, we're working with third-party providers to develop the necessary applications. Several of those are now ready and in some instances have been deployed in fisheries. We anticipate that several other fisheries will have these e-logs deployed next year. I can also note that we are piloting some electronic monitoring tools, for example, in the Gulf St. Lawrence redfish fishery, and those are also obviously used in other fisheries in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Lots of good information. Perhaps I can ask some further clarification at our next meeting, because I think I only have another few minutes left. I have so many questions that I want to be asking, and it is a little frustrating that I'm having to focus on these questions in particular around the lighthouse keepers that are being removed. However, I'm getting endless concerns around the safety implications to coastal communities and mariners. And so I really want to be able to dig into these issues a little bit more. And I apologize earlier, Mr. Pelletier, for cutting you off. I wanted to hear from the minister directly. But I would like to hear, there was a report, the Geohazard Risk Assessment Report from 2024. It cites reports from 2018 where it outlines the risks to structures at the Pachena Bay and Carmana Point light stations. And I'm wondering when these reports were made available to the public and to the lighthouse keepers.
The lighthouse keeper, the union have the report. They've had it for a number of weeks now. So as soon as we received the 2024 report, which identify high risk to the occupant of the infrastructure, we had a responsibility to act promptly and discuss with the light keepers and the union about the safety risk. That's an obligation under the labor code. And we had to take action to protect them, and that's what we're doing right now. After that, we'll look at potential solution. But right now, it was about protecting the safety of the light keepers.
Thank you. I can appreciate that is very important. The 2018 reports that are referenced, when were those reports made available to the lighthouse keepers that talked about the safety concerns at these two light stations?
I wasn't aware of the 2018 report up to until just before the 2024 report was. So I'm not sure how broadly, but we can get back to you. But I know there was some action plan taken trying to see what was in the realm if possible to protect the infrastructure, and it got delayed, and it was very costly. So we had to look at reinvestment, and meanwhile, that's why, because of the potential high risk to the occupant, we've asked for the geohazard assessment.
Okay. The reason why I'm asking these questions is because concerns were brought to my attention that there were risks associated with these light stations that were made available in 2018, but they were only made available with them in the last few weeks. And so they're questioning if their safety really was being put at the forefront when these reports were sat on for 6 years, and now suddenly they're being moved on. So there's some questions being asked around was the labor code followed? Why weren't they made aware if there were safety implications for 6 years? So there's some questions around that. So perhaps you could provide some additional information in writing around that. If you would like to know what reports I'm talking about specifically, we can continue that conversation. Is there any comment that you have around those concerns that were brought to my attention?
Like I said, the people in charge of all the infrastructure and the FOO, they've looked at what could be done to remediate. And the first one was the technical assessment and not the geohazard assessment. So basically, we had in our hands knowing that there was some instability in the ground, and they looked at potential solution. When it started taking too long, I've asked for the second report to be produced to make sure that we address the hazards to the occupant of the buildings.
Okay, thank you. What is the plan then if these 2 light stations are being destaffed to ensure the safety of coastal communities?
So right now the plan is to make sure they're safe, and that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks because it takes a lot of logistic because that's their home. And after that, we'll sit down with our team in real property and look at what's what's possible to do. Is it possible to move the infrastructure, or do we need to and to ensure the safety of navigators? I think the lighthouse itself, the light has to be moved because it's very unstable. So that will be the priority because that light is directly serving the mariners.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. You're gone over a little bit, but that's fine. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the 3 that are here to testify today. Appreciate it, and especially to you, Mr. Pelche, for the Coast Guard and all of your members that so bravely serve to protect our coastline. I want to pass on my expression of gratitude to their work. I'll start with Mr. Burns, if I could. Mr. Burns, how long have you been in the position of ADM with the department?
A little over 2 years.
2 years. So you should be quite well versed on activities within the department and work being done?
Sure. Yes.
Yes? Okay. In the December 2021 mandate letter to the minister, which is still referred to on the Government of Canada's DFO website, it included instructions to work to introduce Canada's first ever Aquaculture Act. That mandate letter was December of 2021. That's almost 3 years ago now. What progress has been made towards that goal?
If I might, Chair, I can help to address the question. So there has been work with provincial territorial counterparts on advancing work with respect to the Aquaculture Act, including in particular in the context of CCFAM, so the Canadian Committee of Fisheries and Aquaculture Ministers, and that has been a work of collaboration amongst them. Policy development continues within the department and stakeholders, with work ongoing on the Aquaculture Transition Plan and others. That work has been appropriately prioritized against the active work on the transition plan and other activities.
How close would you think we are to seeing a plan? Will it be happen before we head to an election, which could be any day now, given the dumpster fires that this government is dealing with on a daily basis?
That work is ongoing. I couldn't speak to whether it would be available before the election or not.
Okay. Also in that mandate letter were basically directions to modernize the Oceans Act to explicitly consider climate change impacts and so on. What progress has been made towards that goal to modernize that act? It would be something that would need to go through the legislative process in the House of Commons and then eventually come to this committee. Time is ticking. Are we ever going to see it?
Work remains ongoing with respect to amendments to the Oceans Act. I can assure members that the legislative framework as we have it allows us to take into consideration climate change in the design of marine protected areas and other conservation tools. The Act would obviously provide Act amendments would provide greater precision to that, and that work continues.
Thank you. I'll go back to Mr. Burns right now because you should have quite detailed information on this question. Earlier in the minister's testimony, she stated that there were no rules in reference to the Elver fishery, and that's why they had to close it down, or why it's been so chaotic. Would you agree with that statement that there were no rules, or that were there no regulations regarding the Elver fishery?
What we've been working on in order to get the Elver fishery in a place that we believe it could operate more effectively are regulations related to the possession and transport of Elvers, as well as traceability regime. And those elements did not exist.
Around the minister's statement that there were no rules. That's a quote. I wrote it down when she said it because I couldn't believe she said it. Was that a correct statement, that there were no rules?
So it is true that there were no rules related to the possession and rules related to traceability of Elver, which we believe are necessary in order to effectively manage this fishery.
Were there rules around licensing?
Indeed, there are. The fishery is a licensed fishery, and in those licenses there are several conditions of license.
So there were rules.
There are there's rules that govern every fishery. What there weren't in place and what we are working on putting in place now are those measures related to possession and traceability.
Then the minister basically misled this committee by stating there were no rules.
I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but
I do.
She would have been referring to the absence of rules related to possession and traceability.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Weiler for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. But I will turn my time over to Mr. Cormier, who I believe has at least a question to ask here.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Yeah, just had one more question. Mr. Byrne, DFO offices in my region or in Atlantic Canada or elsewhere in Canada, fishermen can just go, call, knock on door, sometime have a meeting with some official. A woman called me. A woman was working at a lower level in one of those offices. What she told me was very disturbing. She said that if, I wanted to meet with her and to have information on a particular project or whatsoever that I wanted information, that she needed to sign a document, ask if she could meet with me, then report back what was said in that meeting. I'm an elected official. That's what is supposed that you need to sign a form and everything. My first comment to her is are we in Russia here or what? So if such document exists, because what she told me also is that doesn't come from a minister or a government decision. It's coming from the higher deputy level. It's 200 cans that they need to sign a form. Tell with which MP they met. What was the purpose of the meeting and report that back to the Deputy Minister office. Is such a document exist? Yes or no?
Is a nonpartisan institution, and so there is reporting requirements when there are interactions with the political with politicians. That's a reporting requirement, so that the department and the minister are aware of those conversations. It's not a prohibition on those conversations.
Are you the only department in the government that is doing that?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay, thank you. Give my time back to Mr. Wilder now.
And I do want to thank our witnesses for being here today and answering our questions. I want to touch on a program that actually it's a big priority for British Columbians, something that I long advocated for as along with many other MPs from British Columbia, and that's the Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative, which, to my knowledge, is the largest recovery package for any species in Canadian history. This was announced in 2021. There's several components of it. And I was hoping you might be able to give us an update on how this program is rolling out, particularly if you can give some metrics and statistics on, kind of things like areas of habitat restoration and some of the other outcomes that we can point to from this program.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And to mention, underline that there has been thus far a $201 million, $2.5 million investment in targeted actions to address Pacific salmon declines under the Pacific Salmon Strategy, and a good $90.9 million of that delivered in partnership with others, which is a very important aspect of the program's work. So far this year, this fiscal year, 24-25, the department has spent $26 million, again, $11.1 million of which is spent with partners. Happy to provide specific details of outcomes in writing, but some of the key activities that we have been engaged in is working to rebuild those key salmon stocks, to support innovative Indigenous harvesting practices, support license retirements for commercial fish harvesters where that's required, address severe drought impacts where that's increasingly affecting Pacific salmon populations, and also provide an ongoing response to the Chilcotin landslide, which we know is having effects on upstream migration of Chinook salmon. But certainly happy to provide further detail on outcomes in writing.
That would be much appreciated. I just want to pick up on that last point, because there was the slide in the Chilcotin. There's actually one in my riding, the Birkenhead River. And so I'm curious, when we have one of these emergency situations that comes forward, how are we able to respond to that? And is there funding to direct to emergency responses that we know are going to become more and more frequent with a more variable climate?
Thank you for the question. So certainly where those emergency situations arise, we've seen them at Big Bar, we've seen them in Chilcotin. I appreciate the reference you've just made to a further landslide. These are natural circumstances, but also ones that can be accelerated in the context of extreme weather events and climate change. We work immediately with partners both in the province and certainly First Nations and others to identify what response measures are required. There is no dedicated emergency response fund, but typically we will look to existing funding resources, including initiatives like the Pacific Salmon Initiative that are focused on these matters, to see what funding can be provided and where those needs exceed what the department is able to bear within its own mandates. We, of course, will chat with colleagues at the centre about what further might be required.
Thank you, Mr. Waller. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Monsieur le Président, je vais.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be a bit of a pain, to be honest. I'd like to come back to my whole story of offshore vessels who get allocations, historic allocations, whereas in Quebec, and I just have to say this, the fishery economy is in a terrible way. Lobster is doing well, but lobster, we don't know how long it's going to last. There's a kind of lethargy when it comes to proactive action to support inshore fisheries in Quebec. But there's a real problem. I said this earlier to the minister. We saw this in TV reports. These people are only on TV because it's a serious situation. They have better things to do with their time. How do you foresee the possibility of providing support to pelagic fishers, shrimpers, inshore fishers? How can you support these fisheries and ensure there's a real succession to maintain skill sets so that these sectors don't die off in Quebec? Because that's what's happening as a result of your decisions. It's perhaps not your decisions, it's perhaps the minister's decisions, but what can be done to put a stop to this, to really start on a on a better footing? Do you have specific recommendations for the minister, and does she listen to you? As you said, there are fisheries that are doing quite well, for example, lobster, and of course the minister has made decisions in that respect, and we're organizing consultations with respect to certain lobster harvesting zones in Quebec. She's also done allocations for the shrimp fort and for the redfish fishery to allocate a share of redfish, to allocate sufficient redfish to support at least some harvesting communities. She's very aware of the need to identify other fisheries where her decisions can help fishers, help the industry overall. But of course, there's the impact of climate change, which is changing the distribution of biomass, the volume of biomass, and we have to keep making decisions in accordance with these environmental changes that we've been seeing.
To Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair, to Mr. Pelletier, can you please confirm that you'll be moving forward with the destaffing of lighthouses in Caramana Point and, oh my gosh, Petite Bay, thank you, starting this Friday? Can you please confirm that?
It is within a number of days or weeks. It's not in a month from now because we want to have the people out before the winter season. Whether it's this Friday or next Friday, I can confirm, but they are moving, yes.
Thank you. And can you please confirm if you've received emails, correspondence, phone calls, letters from members of the community asking to halt this removal of staff from the lighthouses?
I didn't personally receive email, or I was aware that our office did receive a few letters today, but that being said, the safety of our employees is my first priority, and in order to protect their safety, I had to remove them from there.
Thank you. And what consultation has occurred with those that you are referencing, those whose safety that, through the chair, that you're worried about? What consultation has happened to speak with them about their concerns and how to best move forward?
It has been ongoing since we received the 2024 report, and it's and we sat down with the employees and make sure that we were able to find them work somewhere else, and to provide them how the transition would be made. Once they are removed from the hazard, then we'll look at the next steps.
Thank you. I've also heard that there's a light station review committee that has been established. Is this true, and who's on this committee?
What I've asked in the report you quoted from the Senate in 2011, it also asked to review on an ongoing basis, and that's something that we haven't done systematically. So light stations are part of the broader aids to navigation network system, and we have a requirement that every 5 years we review all the systems, and light station are part of that.
Last question I want to get in. There was money that was allocated specifically to, of course I can't find it now. I've heard that there was money that was allocated specifically to the Petite Bay. I believe there's a duplex there that money was supposed to be allocated to the mitigation of the concerns that you were talking about. And I'm being told that that money was never used, that those mitigations were not made. Are you familiar with this?
I think the mitigation...
Could I ask for answer in writing, please, because Ms. Barron has gone over time. I have to get to another couple of questioners. We'll move on now to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses. My first question is for the Commissioner of the Coast Guard. The Polar Class 1 icebreakers, announced in 2007 at a cost of $700 million, the first boat, is still not having, all these years later, a design hasn't been approved. Now, the Parliamentary Budget Officer put out a report in 2021 and updated it this year. When you were here last time, before we had the update, you agreed that the cost estimates were right there, but you said that we would be on time and on budget. Now, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has updated that and actually says at the current estimate now, it's actually $1.2 billion more than it was just a year ago, and that it will be $260 million additional costs for every year before steel is cut. So do you agree with that assessment, and that what was said to the committee a year or so ago was incorrect, in that it won't be on time and on budget, since it's already, yet again, not on time and not on budget?
A year ago, I communicated the information we had. We continue to work with the shipyards to make sure we have timely delivery of ships and with reasonable costs. This is an ongoing process. And as far as the POB report, we've already went public saying that we agreed with their findings.
So you said that the first ship would be in the water by 2030, but that's clearly not going to be the case now. So that 2030 will be over 20 years to get this done. Isn't that a little excessive?
There's been some delays in shipbuilding and to put in place the NSS, because that one was announced before the NSS was put in place. So the NSS and all the negotiation with the shipyard, providing the time for the shipyard to ramp up their capability. And other priority vessels were put ahead as well too, such as the science vessel, were built ahead of time.
Thank you. Mr. Burns, or whoever is appropriate, in 2022, the BC Supreme Court in the Maui aquaculture case ruled that the minister could not make decisions that didn't come up as a policy, one of the policy recommendations from the department. Did the department comply, or did the minister comply with that court ruling in making the Elver fishery decision that she has made recently? In other words, did the department recommend this as one of the options?
Specifically, what are you? Which of the decisions are you referring to? The consultations that are
consultation letter to take away 75% of the quota from license holders.
So yes, those consultations are underway. They're the result of a minister's decision.
I said, did the recommendation from the department include that as a recommendation? Because the court requires that to happen for the minister to be legally doing this.
So the minister's decision is certainly a legal one to undertake these consultations. I can assure you of that. And in terms of the results of these consultations, decisions for 2025 haven't been taken.
Well, I don't know how it would be legal, since the court also ruled that reasons had to be provided, legitimate policy reasons, in the consultation. This letter, which went out, contains no reasons, not one reason about why it's being done. And that's your consultation in writing, one-page letter. We're considering doing this. Tell us in 2 weeks what you think. Doesn't say anywhere in that letter. That's not a real consultation, and doesn't say anywhere in that letter the reasons. So you're, once again, on that level, in breach of the BC Supreme Court ruling.
Again, this is a consultation, and the minister's decisions for 2025 will be taken subsequent to the consultations and informed by the various views that will be brought forward.
The court-required consultation have reasons. You're not providing the reasons, and therefore, it's not a legal letter. I will move on. How much TAC are you, or how much quota are you going to give each of the 30 individual eel license holders? And is that going to be new TAC as it was when this was created? Or is it coming again from the existing license holders?
And those decisions haven't been taken yet. They will be taken following the consultation. So I can't answer that question because the decision hasn't been taken at this time.
And are you aware that there are only 2 buyers in the current license holder? So how are these individuals with only, the department has told people, it's not in the letter, 15 kilograms is what you'll give to the employees. How are they supposed to run that business, sell it, keep it alive when there are only 2 buyers with that facility? And do you actually think they can make a living? Because they're not going to get the kind of money they're getting now, because they'll be in between now.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins, and I would hope that Mr. Burns can provide an answer in writing. You've gone a little bit over time. I want to squad in Mr. Kellaway there for his questions. 5 minutes or less, please.
5 minutes or less. Does anybody ever do less? Okay. Well, I'm not going to today. I want to talk a little bit about conservation and protection. The work that these men and women do in the various regions has certainly gotten more complex and more dangerous. I'm just wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what we're doing to assist these men and women to do their job effectively. I know that there's been requests and different type of activities and discussions around equipment and things of that nature. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because I think that's important. That's my first question. And my second question is just around the general enforcement. When we look at, I'm not going to ask you to break down enforcement in every single region in Canada, but I would like for you to kind of walk through, maybe give us a specific example, say something in the South Shore with respect to what's been happening in terms of enforcement, the different activities around processors being investigated, things that you can tell us to a certain extent. I know you can't tell us everything. That would be very helpful.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The conservation and protection officers have a multitude of responsibilities in their functions that include certainly law enforcement type activities, but also include various other activities, marine mammal response, Canadian shellfish sanitation program, habitat enforcement. And so, the role of a CMP officer is diverse and broad. But specifically related to the concerns that we've heard recently from some CMP officers related to dangers that may be present in their working environment, we are working with Labour Canada and with our officers themselves, as well as with other advisors, in order to put in place a variety of additional tools that will increase the safety of the officers' activities, as well as other training elements as well, to further mitigate the risks that are inherent in what those officers are doing. Your other question related to enforcement, and in particular in Southwest Nova Scotia, as is the case anywhere, that there is a period of time where there's an enhanced focus on the ground enforcement activities. We certainly deploy the local resources in a manner that prioritizes that specific issue or enforcement activity. But in addition to that, we do work with CMP divisions in other parts of the country to reassign officers temporarily in order to augment the presence, and that's something that we've done again this year and have in previous years as well. We also work with other government agencies, including the Canada Revenue Agency, the RCMP, FinTrack, and others, in order to use the resources across the federal family, as well as in partnership with the province. The province is, of course, having responsibility on the processing sector side and an enforcement and licensing and permitting capacity there as well. And so our objective is to work in concert with all of those other enforcement agencies, so that we don't so that we interrupt the overall process of unauthorized activity from the water to the marketplace, in order to reduce the benefits that that illegal activity can provide to those who are engaged in it.
A minute? Less than a minute. Well, let's just finish it off with a bit of science, if we can pivot from conservation and protection to science. Just very quickly, during my time as parliamentary secretary, I've heard a lot from inshore and offshore and NGOs around the importance of working with DFO in terms of the analysis and the synthesis of science. I know we have a particular model of how we engage those groups, but I'm wondering, are we looking at other ways to further engage them in terms of those aspects of science, the retrieval of science and the understanding of science and the synthesis of science, in terms of making a broader collaboration deeper?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question, and certainly it is the department's kind of ongoing and intended to be enhanced program to work actively with partners in further scientific research. Seal science is an example where we've worked actively with the FFAW and other seal industry partners to advance our particular understanding of those various seal stocks, and we do likewise in the broader fisheries context and intend to do more in future.
Thank you, Mr. Kellaway. That closes off our second hour of committee business, and I want to thank Mr. O'Day, Mr. Burns, and especially Mr. Pelletier. And if you could pass along a message to the local Coast Guard in Newfoundland and the work they did in saving the Lucky Seven, as they're known as, that could have ended much worse than it did. And it was good to see all of them make it back safe to shore. Again, so thank you to your staff for the great job and the great effort they did in bringing them back to shore. Thank you. Monday, we will resume our study of derelict and abandoned vessels with testimony from witnesses. I want to thank everybody, the clerk and our analyst and the translation team for helping make this meeting a success today. And again, meeting adjourned